for your show, you need to find your disciples. You need to find those people who are aligned with you and your mission and what your goals are and link arms with them.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
And we're back with another episode of the podcast on podcasting. And today is going to be an interview podcast. We have somebody on the show who manages tons of different podcasts. They do coaching and consulting for people and their podcasts. And they've been producing podcasts for years and years and years. If I am not mistaken, today is your 7-year anniversary as we record. Is that right, Jaime?
That is correct. We are celebrating 7 years of this crazy ride I've been on.
So when did you start your first podcast? What year was that?
2014, and it was a podcast called Curve the Cube, and it was about curving yourself out of your cubicle. I was very clever back then, clearly, the titles, but that's what it was. Yeah, 2014. It was made with rubber bands and sticky tape.
I've got to look that up. So with your podcast now, you have Finding Florida, which is really interesting because on this episode, I really want to talk about getting sponsors for podcasts. And with your network, you use the sponsorship model. So all of these different shows that you're working with, you're attracting sponsors. You know how to reach out to sponsors. You know how to charge the sponsor, what's fair, what's a good number, how to get the highest price. And that's some of the things that I believe that the rest of us want to know. And one of your podcasts, you got sponsored in a really cool way. It's called Finding Florida. And Finding Florida is a podcast about travel. I would like you to tell us a little bit more about how you were able to go to these cool places without a whole bunch of money out of your pocket.
Absolutely. Man, was that show fun. And it's on a hiatus because of COVID, but we're going to bring it back in all of its glory. So Finding Florida, what we did was actually the flagship show for Florida Podcast Network. And we did this show on purposely in this way. We knew that what we needed to make Florida Podcast Network really grow was to be well embedded with the travel and tourism industry in Florida. It's the number one industry here. So this was all with intention. As fun and crazy as the show was, it was strategic and smart. So what we did was we created a show concept. And actually, I have to give the honor to Glenn the Geek for this brainchild. Glenn the Geek is the owner of the Horse Radio Network. He's been talking about horses for many years. And he's like, I need to talk about something else other than horses. I need to get out of the house. So we came up with this idea to travel together monthly and call it Finding Florida. And so the very first episode, what we did was, that was not sponsored. The first episode was not sponsored, but we did 10 free things to do in Disney using only Disney transportation in one day. And that was a bear, and we almost killed ourselves. It was a lot of fun. But what that did was that gave us a really good showcase of what we are about and what we can do. And then we created a one sheet about our show and a little sizzle reel about our show. And we're like, well, we need to send this out to visitors bureaus and whatnot. What we realized when we did a search for where can we find these contacts that we need to make? Well, we discovered Visit Florida. It's a travel bureau for the entire state. And then the moment of genius struck. And this is what I want everyone to listen to right here. Perk up, okay? The moment of genius was getting involved in a conference in the industry we were serving. So we found this conference that Visit Florida was putting on called Florida Huddle. And it's a conference specifically for the travel and tourism industry in Florida. Hello, gold. And we didn't just buy tickets as attendees. No. That wasn't what we were doing. We applied for media credentials. We got media passes, and they were so excited because they had never been asked for a podcaster to attend for media. So we got media passes. So yes, you got to go for free, winning. But then also we got to meet like everybody within a day, all the visitors bureaus that we wanted to meet, a whole bunch of awesome venues that we wanted to participate in. But we didn't just go there and meet everybody. And we didn't go wearing nice business clothes either. We went in swag like crazy, head to toe, obnoxious, like shirts, Finding Florida. We had our mic flags on our microphones, and we walked around that place and we interviewed people. We created a buzz about our show, and we got all these people involved in an episode, and they were so excited. So we had this one episode, the second or the third, it's just a stringing together of all these short interviews with different, like visit Daytona, visit Tampa Bay, and they were all jazzed about it. So we got to know them. And not only did we get to know them, it wasn't a cold call. They got to participate and see in real life how much fun it is, what the potential is, and they understood it right away. So going to that conference was absolutely the biggest and best thing that we did. And that is how we started to get sponsorships. So we worked with these visitors bureaus, small business associations, the venues sometimes directly themselves, and they would figure out hotels and lodging for us. We did have to manage our own gas mileage, that kind of stuff. So be it. But we did get put up in great hotels, amazing hotels. We got to go and see the most incredible things and do fun things. And it was such a wonderful experience. So yeah, when you look at findingflorida.podcast.com and you see the pictures, those are all things that we got paid to do just because they appreciated the value of not just having a commercial on the radio that ran for 30 seconds about the experience, but having someone live the experience and make it audio for everyone to enjoy and bring it to life. It was just, man, we were accidental geniuses finding that conference that day and applying for media credentials.
That's so cool. And I have found a lot of success with different businesses that I've been part of by attending conferences and talking about my podcast. I've found a lot of success myself with different businesses by actually going to conferences, interviewing people, telling people about my podcast. That's how I've built a lot of our businesses. In fact, I've recently started, I've never done a media pass, and I don't know how to do a media pass for this yet. Maybe Jaime can help me. I am sponsoring a podcast conference coming up in August. It's a podcast conference, and we're taking a booth and we're putting stuff in all of the bags. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And I agree with you that being part of conferences, whether you are a media pass for free and wearing a whole bunch of swag and putting mic flags all over and interviewing people, whatever it is, I think these conferences are a super good place to be able to meet the exact right person that would either listen to your show or sponsor your show. You mentioned two things right before you started getting into the conference and this awesome idea that I think that the listener definitely needs to write down and make sure that they do a couple of this year. You mentioned that you got a one sheet and a sizzle reel after your first episode, which was 10 free things that you can do in Disney by using their public transportation. Then you created these two things. The listener might be curious, what is a one sheet? What is a sizzle reel? How do you make them? What goes into them? What do they do for you? How do you make a good one? How do you show it to the right people? So if you wouldn't mind going into the one sheet and sizzle reel a little bit more.
Absolutely. So for the one sheet, what you really want to do is put yourself in the mind of the person who would be giving you money. Remember that people work hard for their money. So for them to turn over that money to you, you need to prove that it's worth it. So what are the questions they're going to be wondering? They're going to be wondering, is this aligned with my customer base? What is this show about? Who is this host that's hosting it? They have a lot of questions. So that one sheet really needs to answer all those questions. So your show art, your show description, a little bit about you as a host, and also information about the sponsorship opportunity. What do the packages look like? What are some of the price points? And then also flesh out some numbers, like highlight the numbers that are really good. If you have great download numbers or good social media following, those kinds of things can be added in as well. And then I also love to add in pictures. Now you might be thinking, but as an audio program, what pictures do I have? Well, anything that is illustrative of what your show is about. So as an example, for finding Florida was easy. We added pictures from our adventure, so easy peasy. But if you have a show, for example, Florida Beer Podcast, it's all audio. There's no, it's just him recording at the different breweries. But what we did was one of the breweries has a photographer on staff, and she was more than happy to lend her photography skills. And she took awesome photos of him behind the bar with different beers and stuff. And so that's what we use as a visual on the one sheet. Because what you want to do is you want to make it so easy for them to immediately understand what your show's about and why they want to be involved. So before they even read a single word on the page, the pictures really help bring it to life. So that's the one sheet. And then as far as the sizzle reel, what you'll want to do is take 2 or 3 clips, a minute or two long, that really highlight some great moments of your show, give the sense of what the show's about. And then you're going to want to string them together, edit them together. You can put like a little transition in between, super brief. You can introduce them if that feels right. You can put your music bed of your show underneath them, but create a nice little audio chunk, a nice little bite for them to dive into. And I think that is a lot more effective than sending a link to a full episode, simply because if you send a link to a full episode, it feels like work. It feels like, okay, I have to set aside 45 minutes or whatever to listen to this thing. So that's one thing. That's one hurdle they have to get over. You don't want that, put that hurdle in front of them. The other thing is that now you're relying on them to find the best part of that episode. You might think this is a great episode all around, but it's because there's a part or two that are specifically the really good stuff. So instead of having them just going on faith that they're going to see it, just give it to them. Make a little sizzle reel. So that's what that is. Add that to your one sheet. You can either upload it to Dropbox or Google Drive, create a link for it. And then in the one sheet itself, you can actually link to it. You can say, for a sizzle reel, click here. And then highlight it, put a link, put that in there. And then when you send that PDF of your one sheet, they can still click through to your sizzle reel.
Jaime, I've got a few questions on this stuff. And I want to make sure that if I understand it and I can really extract this from you, I think the listener is going to get more value for when they're building it. And so I took notes. I can't say I took the very best notes, but here's what I'm getting. For the one sheet, you want your show artwork, like your little podcast logo, and you want that to be on this thing called a one sheet. The purpose of a one sheet is to tell people about your show in case that they want to sponsor the show. So you put the show art, you also put a show description. Mm-hmm. I heard that you need to talk a little bit about the host. And then I think you mentioned that you talk about the listener who's listening. Is that right?
Yeah, that can be a really strong thing to put in there. Sometimes it's for space purposes. It might be really easily worked into the description. We present this content for 40-year-old moms to blah, 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 right? Or you can just literally say target audience and then flesh out who they are. Just give that information in there. It can be super helpful because then the potential sponsor will know if that client base is well aligned. It's like a Venn diagram with the 2 circles. You want to make sure that they're overlapping between your listeners and that potential sponsor's client base. They want those 2 circles to overlap as much as possible. I need to show them that they overlap as much as possible.
And then I feel like I missed at least one thing right around this piece, right after you were talking about letting us know about the listener and after telling us about the host. So I need you to help me get back there, but there was a couple things that I did get here. You said use lots of pictures, use pictures. A picture tells 1,000 words, and there's a lot of ways to do it. It was really interesting, the person with that beer podcast, that even though the beer podcast doesn't have any video to it, when he went to one of the breweries, you mentioned that the photographer at the brewery took some really cool pictures of him so that you could put this on the one sheet. And so I really liked that. And I think we can all take that to the bank. And then the last thing that I wrote down was on the one sheet, you can put a hyperlink to the sizzle reel. Mm-hmm. So if it's a PDF, you could have a saved hyperlink to check out our sizzle reel here, where it will go to a website or something like Vimeo or just a Dropbox or a Google Drive or a private YouTube or something like that.
Right. And also,
go ahead.
Just one extra little thing can also be very helpful on the website for your podcast to put that one sheet of your show right there, and so that people can click through to it there.
So on the podcast website or on your business website?
Well, the podcast website for sure. And if your podcast and your business are well aligned, then sure. I mean, they probably should even be perhaps the same website with the podcast having a landing page for that on that website of your business. But if not, if they are separate, then yeah, put it on both for sure.
Got it. So what was the thing that I missed on the one sheet that is important?
Sure. I think it was perhaps the breakdown of the packages. I like to include, some information about what is the potential for the sponsorship. So typically what I'll have is I'll have 2 levels. You don't want to throw them too many options, otherwise it gets overwhelming and complicated. Even though we can really customize our sponsorship packages and we've done all kinds of stuff, on paper, it's 2 choices. You either are a title sponsor or you're a premier sponsor. So a title sponsor means that you get first mention in the episode, you're actually part of the title of the episode, that you're on the show art of the episode, that you have a link in the show notes, that you have a banner ad in the show notes, you have a banner, and there's all these details, right? But that is the main crux of that slot. Then anything else in the episode, a mid-roll, a post-roll, all the other stuff just gets lumped under the next level, which is called a premier sponsorship. That's a little bit lower level, little lower price point. And so you don't get as much, right? So you don't get the naming within the title of the episode. You don't get mentioned at the front. It's probably just a pre-produced ad or something very quickly host read at the end. And so it's a little lower price point. But what I do make clear in the verbiage is that it's very customizable and that we have a lot of fun putting packages together. As an example, this wasn't for Florida Podcast Network. This is actually a deal we brokered for the Wedding Biz Network, where it was a sponsor who had a wholesale business. And so what we did was we crafted a campaign. It was a 6-episode campaign. And one of those episodes had 2 spots in it where in the first part, it wasn't us, it wasn't the host, it wasn't the sponsor. It was actually one of the sponsor's clients. So the client came on and talked about what problem they had. And they said, I can't wait later in the program to tell you all about how this sponsor helped. And then they came back on later and talked about how they helped. And the sponsor loved it. It was storytelling. So there's so many different ways to do it. But within the context of the PDF of the one sheet, it's really simple. 2 levels and just letting them know that it can be customized and we can have a lot of fun with it. Oh, and then one other thing also is if you do have a great social media presence, also mentioning that they can get a mention on your Facebook, on your Twitter, on your Instagram, those kinds of things also really help.
Cool. I've done a little bit of research and I learned something that may or may not benefit you and your clients or our listener. I would love to share just a bit real quick about this research. And what it is that odd numbers, for some weird reason, odd numbers of choices are better than even numbers of choices. The second thing is that most people select the middle option. Mm-hmm. About 10% of the people pick the top option all the time just because it's the most expensive option and they always want the best. But most of us select the middle option. And so with this little bit of research, I found that making 3 package levels can be of benefit, where you really make that highest one, like your title sponsor that you mentioned before. You make your highest one very high, and then you make the middle one wherever you think that they're going to buy and what would really make you happy. And then the bottom one, you make almost the same as the middle one. So the prices are not very different from the bottom, which gets almost nothing, and the middle, which you want them to pick. And that can allow us psychologically to help sell more of these packages. So that may be true, that may not be true. Jaimes' plan might be absolutely perfect, but these are some real things that I found as I was doing some research. Hopefully that's helpful to others. And Jaimes, I was thinking about, as you stated, your 2 levels. The last person I helped do this, we called it platinum, gold, and silver. And we like to price anchor, so we say the platinum first. And so the higher price is there instead of the lower price is there. And then they're like, oh, I don't know if I wanted price anchor the opposite direction. But we called it platinum, gold, and silver. Yours, I liked yours better. Title and premier. They both sound epic. So the question, though, is about a contract period. With this client that she and I just worked together this week, I think it was Monday. I think it was like 2 days ago. As we were going over her stuff, we put 3 different contract periods under each one. And I'm curious if you have contracts, but we wanted to do a 3-month for a really high price, a 6-month for what she was looking for, and then a 12-month for only slightly different than the 6-month. I'm curious, do you do no contract? Do you do a 1-month contract, a 3-month, a 4-month, a 6-month, a 12-month, a 2-year contract? What does it look like as we want to add this to our one sheet? If we're thinking, should we do a contract? Is it scary? Am I going to lose out on business if I try to lock them in for a certain amount of time? What do you guys do, Jaime?
Well, luckily, I think we've been doing this long enough that the proof is in the pudding for us, meaning that we have our advertisements, we have sample ads on the website, that kind of thing. We have listing of past sponsors and so on and so forth. So I think we have the benefit of that trust right there off the bat. So we don't necessarily need a contract in that sense. So in some situations, we do have contracts, some situations we don't. What I prefer is I don't necessarily see the need for a contract simply because I know I'm going to hold up my end of the bargain. They're curious as whether or not I don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to hold up their end of the bargain because I require prepayment. So they have to pay me before we get started on any work for any advertisements. So they pay ahead. So from their standpoint, they might want a contract because they want to know that they're paying money, that this is going to be seen all the way through. But we have the benefit of having that history already embedded in what we've done. So we haven't had a sponsor require that yet. But if we did, then we have those readily available. It's not our normal course of work, but we do have those available. Now, as far as an amount of time, goodness gracious, you're going to be spinning your wheels and driving yourself crazy if you try to get a different sponsor in every single episode. Don't do that. The better play is to do these long-term packages. And so sometimes what I'll do, and this has actually helped me sell sponsors from episode 1 and this most recent show that we launched, the Fresh Mix. What we did was we offered them at minimum sponsor package requirement of 4 episodes. And if you do, for every 4 episodes that you secure, we will also throw in a free spot on a pre-established show. So that's another way to do it, to lock them into big groups. But you want to get people to sign up for long term so that you're not spinning your wheels trying to go after advertisement every single episode. You'll go crazy.
So how long are you focused on trying to get that sponsor then? Because we may be just using slightly different language. The term contract is less important to what I was stating, and the term of the engagement was really my focus that I was trying to relay. And so I'm curious, we want ours to be a minimum of 3 months, and we're hoping that it goes for 6 or 12. And so I'm curious with what you're doing, is there not maybe a contract, maybe I was using the wrong term, but maybe a term, maybe a time frame of how long you intend to have that sponsor as part of your show?
Sure. And so I work per episode simply because I work on so many different shows that's the one thing that I can consistently communicate. Some shows are every day, some are once a week, some are twice monthly. So I always do it per episode as language I usually talk about this in. So if someone wants 4 episodes, if it's a weekly show, then it's a monthly contract. But typically I would want to extend it much more than that if it's a weekly show. And I'm pretty good at convincing people to do so. So that's what I do. I like longer contracts, to use your term again. I like longer agreements, longer sponsorship terms, so that we have that relationship. But also because the golden sponsors is building those relationships. So getting sponsors to renew over and over again, you have to build that really good relationship with them. And that doesn't come by securing them for one spot. It comes by securing them for a number of spots, even if it's smaller than what you would really love. But then you can prove yourself and then you can sign them on for more.
So how should we, on these packages, how should we be charging? What is the cost? Is it $1,000 a month? Is it $100 an episode? Is it $10 an episode? Is it $15 cost per mil, cost per 1,000? What is the right way to charge? And how do we monetize with the most amount of money in our pockets?
Sure. So there are kind of two schools of thought. You know what I mean? One is that you set up a sponsorship model that is more classic traditional media, a cost per download kind of a thing. That's one school of thought. That's what I was looking for, school of thought. Then there's also the other school of thought, which is that you contract a flat fee per spot per episode. That's it. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. How I started at the time when I was beginning this whole thing, what I did to create a sponsorship package that I thought made sense and would be interesting was I looked at magazines and publications in the industry that my show was serving. So what you do is you find, so let's say you are a fishing show. So find some fishing magazines or fishing blogs or whatever. They're going to have, we just got done talking about media kits. They're going to have a media kit. So you're going to be able to see what do they charge for a full page, a half a page, a quarter page ad. And also you're going to see all the different people who are volunteering their ad dollars to be part of that magazine spot. So what you do is those are great people to, first of all, it's a great list to reach out to, right? They're already proving they want to advertise their brand. So you can reach out to them. But then you also have those price points right then and there because the publications have those price points advertised in their media kit. So that's a great starting point. So then what I'll do, again, this is just when I was getting started. What I did then was I just slashed those prices in half and then put feelers out there and see what stuck. And it's all about how you pitch it. So you're talking to people who have already spent, you know how much they spent for that half page ad on that magazine. And you tell them, you spent that in the faith that people are going to turn all the way back of that magazine and actually absorb your ad. You don't know. I said, whereas by working with us, you can even be your voice. It can come alive. We can really share it and be entertaining. And people tend to skip over our advertisements because they're so well embedded within the context of the show. So it's all about that. And then another thing that really helps with the sellability of it, and the reason I shy away from the CPM or the cost per download kind of model is simply because I think that does a major disservice to the value of podcasting. The value in podcasting is much greater, is in the niches. So think about it with radio advertising. You have to cast a wide net. You have no idea if the right kind of client and customer is going to happen to be listening to radio at that time that your ad airs and blah, blah, blah. Like it's a huge net you have to cast, right? Instead, everyone who's listening to my show, they've already self-filtered and said they're interested in this kind of content. So as long as you're mindful of aligning your show and your sponsors to be the same kind of interests, then you can sell that and say, listen, instead of spending thousands of dollars on a radio ad that may not even be seen by the people that you're wanting to be seen, how about you instead put that money into a show that has, it's 200 downloads per episode, but guess what? Those are 200 people who are looking to buy fishing reels. Right? So they're your exact customer. Imagine having them walking through your doors every day. Like that's a different way of selling it. And that's where the gold is. I hope I answered your question. Kind of went on a tangent, I think.
Yeah, you answered most of it. And I'm still curious though of like, how much should we be charging?
Yeah. Okay. So again, it kind of depends. It's all about putting some feelers out. If people chomp down on your price points really easily, the next round, raise those prices and see what happens. It's a little bit of a guessing game still. I'll be completely transparent. Podcasting is still a young industry in a massive evolution phase right now. A lot of money is being poured into the industry. We've become legitimate, which means lawyers are involved, trademarks are involved, all these things. There's now money in this industry. So there's money to be had by every single podcaster. It's all about how you sell your show and then getting those price points to match. So one thing that I kind of say is you might want to look at it if you want to make it super easy peasy. Let's say charge 50 cents a head. Okay. So let's say you have 200 downloads per episode. Say instead of charging your cost per acquisition might be $3-5 on this web advertisement that you're doing, but I'll charge you just 50 cents. So you can do this advertisement for $100 and you get put in front of 200 people who you know are going to be solid contenders for your client base. It's a completely different sell. And if they jump on it really fast, next round, raise your prices.
Yeah. So I like that. And one of the selling points that I had used once upon a time with a previous podcast that I sold, I would reach out to people and I would talk to them about their direct mail. I just mention like how much it costs them to mail all these pieces. Like I would say, hey, I've done direct mail and I know that it costs me around 34 cents per piece of mail. and around 15 cents to send that postcard. And so that's around 50 cents each. This is just the same price. However, no one's just going to throw it away. They're at least going to hear you.
Right.
And it seemed like that was putting it into context the way that you did as well for the advertiser. How much, hey, do you ever sponsor, hey, you're here at this conference, going back to how you were at that one conference. Hey, you're here at this conference spending $3,500 per booth and flying your team in, which is another $2,000, and putting them up in, geez, this hotel that I'm staying at and all my team is staying at. It's like $700 a night. It's called
plus
the Gaylord.
Materials. Yeah,
the Gaylord. Yeah, plus the materials. And so like, hey, Adam, you're here at this place and it's costing you almost $10,000 of hard costs and a lot of time to get here. Wouldn't it be better if you spent $10,000 and got this other result? That makes the person really think, oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm really making it hard on myself. I want the easy route. I want the higher probability. I want less people to throw away my mail. I want more people to be able to see me. So you're saying you spend $10 to be at one conference for just a couple days? How about I put you on my podcast for the next 5 months? Instead of you being in front of 300 people, you'll have 400 downloads per every single episode. And I won't charge you any more, and I'll let you be the only sponsor for the next 5 months. It sounds so compelling when you put it in that context. So, Jaime, I love it, love it, love it. You also have another, well, I was going to talk about your other podcast called Business in the Bedroom, which apparently is not a sexual podcast. Nope,
it's not.
So I was a little disappointed. But before we talk about business in the bedroom, let's jump into this sizzle reel to make sure that I understand what goes into a sizzle reel. The first question that I had, as you mentioned it, you said it was really like highlighted content from many different episodes. The biggest question that I had was about if this is audio only content or if these were the video clips that you're using for a sizzle reel. Could you help me understand that part?
Sure. I've never done a video sizzle reel. I'm sure there's a lot of value for like YouTube channels or Instagram channels, those kinds of things. No, all I've done is audio reels. It's also probably a lot easier from an editing standpoint to put those together. So no, it's just audio, and it's clips that highlight whether it's a really intriguing guest or moment, and something that just provides a good scope and feel of what the show provides to its listener.
Let's pretend, Jaime, that I've already got 100 episodes on my podcast. Now, many listeners today, many probably won't already have 100, but I think this is a helpful metric. I've got 100 of these, and let's pretend that each of them are right around 30 minutes. And I want to make a sizzle reel. I just heard about it from you today, and I'm curious how to do a sizzle reel. The couple of questions that I have is, do I take a clip from all 100 episodes? Do I take it from just 1 or 2 episodes total? Or is there some other number in between that would be kind of magic number? The second question on this is, besides how many different clips that I'm pulling in, how long should a sizzle reel be? You mentioned before that it shouldn't be like 40 minutes. That 40, 45 minutes might be too long, you said, for a lot of people that are just trying to get exposed to something. It's a big investment in time. So I'm assuming that you mean that it needs to be shorter than 45 minutes, but I don't know if that means it's a 10-second clip or a 2-minute clip or what. So really like to know how many clips go into a sizzle reel and how long should the end result be?
You know, it's interesting. As you're talking, I think I just remembered where I got the term sizzle reel from and why call it that. I had a lot of friends who were in the news industry. And so one of them happened to share his sizzle reel with me one day. He was getting ready to look for a new position. And I'm like, what's that? It was a running together of like 5 or 6 clips of him, one on the beat, one at the news desk, and just different. And I was like, that's interesting. So I think that's where I got the terminology from. And so it's definitely not 100 clips. You will lose your mind, and so will the receiver who's trying to absorb it. They'll lose their mind with 100. So there's no magic answer, but I think it has to be a good sampling of your show. I say 3 to 5 is probably enough to give that person a good taste, right? Other than that, what's the point of it being a sizzle reel? You might as well just send them to your website and say, have at it, take a listen to a bunch of them, whatever you want. So I typically say 3 to 5 clips that give a good round representation of your show. So it could be a moment where that was really poignant. It could be a moment where there was an uproarious laughter and everyone was great. But be mindful of what you choose. Take it from episodes that you're really proud of. If you're having a hard time choosing, then you might want to ask your listeners, your friends, your family, what are some episodes that you really enjoy? What's your favorite interview? That kind of stuff. And then pull those and put that together. And I love adding the music bed for my show, whether it's just the beginning and the end, or if it makes sense to run it under very low level underneath the whole thing. Up to you. But that also adds life to the sizzle reel and really gives it that branding so people understand what your show is. That's what you want at the end of the day, is just give them a nice bite that's digestible and makes it easy for them to understand and get excited at the opportunity.
And how about the length of the sizzle reel? You mentioned 3 to 5 clips. Should each clip be 17 seconds? Should each clip be 2 or 3 minutes? So at the end result, how long should this sizzle reel ultimately be?
I say it's safe bet under 10 minutes for sure. But I try to personally keep mine around 5 to 7 minutes. The idea is if I'm emailing it to someone, right, I want when they open that, if they click it open, for them to not say, oh, this is so long later. And then it later becomes never, right? So I want them to say, oh, it's just a couple minutes. I'll listen to it. And then they're just in it. They're like, this is really interesting because it moves really quickly. So that's what I like to do, is something short and sweet that they're going to want to listen to right then and there, no matter what they were doing when they opened up the email.
And before we get into your podcast, your other podcast, the one, the Business in the Bedroom, how do we approach a sponsor? Like, really, really curious what we say to a sponsor, or where do we find them? Maybe my biggest question.
So again, it could be going to the publications that serve your industry can be a great way to find them because they're all listed right in the back with their advertisements. So that's one way. Another way to do it similarly is to bring up conferences once again. Look at the conferences that serve your industry. Who are the brands that sponsored those conferences? Who were the brands that showed up? Who were the speakers? What businesses do they work for? That kind of thing. Those are great ways to get a good contact for sponsors. Another good thing to do is, if it's appropriate, if there's like a Facebook group or something like that that serves your industry or your listener base, then sometimes that Facebook group might even be interested in sponsoring, or meetup group or something like that. They could even be interested in sponsoring. So anything that serves your industry. I mean, I reach out to everybody. If you serve my industry and you possibly want my listeners as your clients, you're on my list.
So you had your first podcast 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was about cubicles. Your second one was about traveling Florida. And this third one is about business in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. And the real question that I think we all have is wondering what you did differently with your newest podcast after all of that other experience to really make the new podcast shine.
Oh, fantastic question. This is a great question. So luckily, I've been blessed with 7 years in this industry. And in that 7 years, I've pretty much done every kind of podcast you could imagine. The first real big gig that I got, aside from producing my own show, was producing Horses in the Morning, which is a live show Monday through Friday. So I produced a live show with listeners calling in. I had to screen calls. It was a podcast, for crying out loud, but it was like a radio experience. I've really done it all. Remote podcasting, mobile podcasting with Finding Florida. So with Curve the Cube, that very first show, it was a guested show where I had someone on who was figuring out how to do what they love for a living. And then at some point, towards kind of maybe the back third of the life of the show, I started adding on a segment where I came on just by myself and I called it the learning curve. And I helped unpack a key point from that person and what they talked about. So when I was considering what to do with this show, what I realized, the place where I'm at now, the purpose of this show. So to back up a little bit, Curve the Cube, I started that show not realizing I was in love with podcasting. I started it because there was a radio opportunity that had been dangling in front of me. And I thought, well, I need some experience doing something. So I started a podcast and then fell in love with it. And so that show was all about my guests. It really, really was. But it became, over the course of the show, the story of my own journey to finding what I love and then making a business out of it. It was accidental, but that's what that show is for me. It's like my own personal diary in a sense. So what I wanted to do with this show, there are no guests on it. It's just me. And what I'm doing now is I'm imparting all the stuff that I've learned in 7 years of building a business and breaking out of that cubicle and doing it. The stuff that I learned from all those people I interviewed back in the day, and then all the stuff that I did on my own, and all the people who've helped me along the way, and all those life lessons, all those failures, all those triumphs, all of it is in that show. And it's just me imparting that wisdom, because that's the place where I'm at now. I'm at a place where I have learned, I've been through the fire, and I've survived, and I want to help other people. And so right now it's kind of a positioning piece, but much more than that, it's just about allowing people to benefit from all the stuff that I've learned I am a firm believer in, it's my passion project in life to get people to do what they love for a living. So that's what that show is. And I just wanted to, again, spill out my brain of all the things that I know. And so that's what it is. It's just me on the microphone. That's business in the bedroom.
Love it. One of the things that you do as a consultant is you help other podcasters grow their audience. Number one, I love that you help with the sponsorship. That is just huge, because most of us are concerned about getting sponsors, and all the feedback that you've given us today about making money through our podcast has been really, really helpful. I just noticed that with your new podcast, you've made a decision to make it just you presenting. And I keep hearing so much from other people that one of the only ways to grow a podcast, or one of the best ways, is to have guests on your show that might share the episode. So I'm wondering if it holds you back by having solo episodes, or if you know something that others don't know, or if it's because of a different reason for going solo on each and every episode, if you wouldn't mind addressing that.
Sure, 100%. Yeah, it was a very conscious decision that I needed this show. I needed the opportunity to get behind the microphone and speak my business piece. That's why I did it. And so for me, it's interesting. I'm so focused on everybody else's show growth and audience growth and sponsorships and everything else. This is me just sharing. It literally is a fully pure representation of my heart, and my intention in this space is to just impart wisdom. So that's what that show's purpose is. I'm not using it to propel my business. I'm not using it to propel my own image. And so for me, just the fact that people are sharing it organically because it's really genuinely helping them, oh my God, does that give me the feels? Like, that is all I need. That is all I need. But to answer your question, for everybody else who the feels isn't enough, I understand that, all right? Literally all the other shows I work on, the feels aren't enough. So to grow your show, I'm going to share my favorite piece of advice in this context, okay? Now, it comes from religion, but it's not religious, okay? And here it is. So Jesus, his message spread across the world because he wasn't the only one walking around telling it, okay? He had 12 disciples who were just as passionate about his mission as he was, and walked their own paths and spread the word. So for your show, you need to find your disciples. You need to find those people who are aligned with you and your mission and what your goals are, and link arms with them. As an example, Finding Florida. Right? The sponsors ate it up that we were showcasing their locations and the fun things that people are able to do in their locations, whether they're visiting or they live there and they're not taking advantage of their own backyards enough. I know I don't. And so that is the purpose of the travel and tourism bureaus, right? Understanding that pain point and what they were trying to do and how well aligned it was with our show is why those sponsorships worked. And so in terms of sponsorships, in terms of audience growth, all the ways you want to grow your show, linking your arms with people who are aligned in the same way as you are is so key. I'll give you another concrete example. So let's say, again, going back to the fishing example, right? You have a fishing show. If there is a Facebook group that is all about fishing shows or fishing stuff or reels, and I know nothing about fishing. I don't know why. I always use a fishing example. I know nothing about fishing. But you find a group, right? And maybe invite that organizer onto your podcast. They're going to share it like crazy. And maybe there are a couple key members of that group who are very vocal and very engaged on the blog or whatever. And you get them involved in the show. Even reach out to the organizer and say, can we make this a more formal partnership here? And they might come on or have someone that they can send over as a guest every month on your show. And that guest mentions their organization, right? So it's linking arms with these people that want to go the same place that you're headed and giving them every reason to be involved with your show. And they then are going to share your show like gangbusters. And I'll say one more note about guests, because this is a huge misconception that I really want to shed some light on. It is a really bothers me whenever I hear it. It breaks my heart a little bit when new podcasters are very focused on getting the biggest names that they can get. I want the big name in the industry, the heavy hitter, because that's going to blow my podcast up. I hate to tell you, no, it's not. And here's why. Because that person, generally speaking, has probably been interviewed a gajillion times. So their followers have had the opportunity to listen to them a gajillion times. And so they're not going to move the needle for you. What is going to move the needle for you is somebody who provides really great value. That has to be the key no matter what. So that person, it provides great value, is going to be what's going to help your show gain success. Now, a good big name can work in two situations really, really well. One is if they're not interviewed a whole lot. If there's someone who's really kind of a recluse and they're hard to get on and you manage to get them, good for you. If I were able to book Bill Murray, I would do that interview in a heartbeat. Are you kidding me? It'd be amazing, right? So that kind of thing. The second way that it really works is if that big name is invited to talk about something that they're not usually invited to talk about. So that no matter how many times they've been interviewed, they might be really jazzed to share this one because they're talking about something different. I'll give you an example. Horse Radio Network does this annual event. It's called their Radiothon. It's 12 hours long. It's this crazy, crazy event, all live. It's super fun. And they get guests on. And they had Priscilla Presley as one of their guests because she got to talk about her horses. They didn't ask a single question about Elvis. And she was so excited. She shouted it out on social media like crazy. So that's what works. If you can give that person the opportunity to talk about something that they love and they never get asked about, that's usually when they're going to really share that episode. So those two key ways you can get that big name to work for you. But typically speaking, it's all about, can that person really give good value to your listeners?
I want to sum up some of what I learned and some of the notes that I took from today's episode. Before I do, I'll mention that Jaimes' website, the links to the podcasts, those are all in the show notes. So if you want to find Florida Podcast Network and everything else, Flint Stone Media, that's all already in the show notes. So go ahead and scroll down and you'll be able to click on any place that you want to follow her or check out what they're doing. Some of what I learned was that business in the bedroom wasn't about sex. Additionally, and in fact, people who are interested in that show typically are doing so much of the other kind of business in the bedroom, they have no time for that. Sadly enough. I also learned that if we want to have sponsors on our podcast, that we can do it in creative ways. We can go and travel for free if we want to. I also learned that if you really want to have sponsors, there's really two things that can support that growth. One of them is your one sheet, and the other one is this highlight reel, this sizzle reel that you've created that one of your friends helped you with. The pieces of the one sheet that I took note of was your podcast artwork, a description of the show and the host and who the listener is, a breakdown of the packages, what it looks like for them to invest their money. You mentioned in passing more than once that it really is helping them achieve what they're looking for. I wrote down WIIFM because we've mentioned that on the podcast before. Everyone's favorite radio station. What's in it for me? And you're always tending to tie your products and your services and your podcast and your answers to questions to how does this support that other person? You're always thinking of how they're going to receive it. And that helps you to be able to be more honed in on your message. A picture tells 1,000 words, link to a sizzle reel. And I loved that you called, when you used 2 different levels, a title sponsor, a premier sponsor, and maybe if you were to add a 3rd sponsor, maybe it would be called a basic sponsor, and it would be almost as much as the premier, but the premier offers more, so they really feel like they're getting a good deal or something like that. And then when we talked about the sizzle reel, you mentioned that these are audio, mostly because it's faster and easier to edit audio, but also because what they're going to be hearing, what they're going to be on, is really focused on audio. So pulling out those highlights, you said 3 to 5 different pieces or episodes where you pull the best highlights out, and you want to make sure that that is under 10 minutes. And if it were me, because I really value my time, I want it 1 or 2 minutes if possible. You mentioned that you focus oftentimes between 5 to 6 minutes for that. And that includes your music, an undertone of your music in the beginning, during, or at the end. Additionally, you gave us a couple other just unique pieces of value that we don't hear every day. One of the 2 that I want to highlight is going to conferences, talking to the sponsors at conferences, interviewing the people at the conferences. And the second one that I want to highlight is this fallacy or this misconception about needing to have big guests, large name guest on your podcast in order to A, build credibility, or B, have them share it, because frankly, they don't usually share it anyway. And so there's not much of a benefit to having someone like that on your show. So we shouldn't go crazy about, oh, I need the biggest name. I couldn't agree more that the main focus of your podcast needs to be around adding value, because when you're focused on adding value and not puffing up your chest, banging your chest like a gorilla, look at this great person that I had on my show, when it's more like, check out this value you've never heard before, it allows people to start sharing shareable content, which turns into the third thing that I wanted to mention is your disciples. Having people like Jesus did, 12 disciples promoting that message, growing that message, and getting people behind a movement and not just a piece of education. I want to thank you for all of your time. All of your links are already in the show notes, and I hope that the listener takes some time to check you out.
Thank you so much, Adam. This has been probably one of the best interviews I've had the honor of being a part of. So thank you so much. And thank you so much to your listeners as well. It has been a pleasure and my honor.
This has been an episode with Jaime Legagneur. I hope I said it right.
You were so worried about the last name. You called me Jamie. Look at that.
Oh my gosh. Jaime Legagneur. We'll go ahead and keep that in, because I'm not the only one who makes mistakes.
Nope.
I think it's important that our new podcasters, our aspiring podcasters, know that we all make little mistakes here and there. So I'm hoping that if you're listening that you already know this, but if you're new to the show, this might be the first time that you've heard me say this. And the fact is that this show has built into it an actual 101 course on podcasting. If you just go back to episodes 1 through 6, I don't need your email. I don't need you to sign up for some newsletter. It's free, completely free, no strings attached. And it helps you get from zero to hero with those first 6 episodes of the podcast. So if you have checked it out and loved it, leave a rating and review about your experience of that first 6 episodes. And if you haven't yet checked it out, do it before you hear the next episode. Jaime Legagneur has been a great guest, and I'm grateful for all of the information that we got from you to being able to monetize our show. I'm going to let you go, but until next time, think outside the box. This episode is brought to you by growyourshow.com. Grow Your Show lets you be the star of your show while we handle all the hard stuff. We offer reliable and affordable post-production services that allow you to grow your show organically without all the work. So go ahead and check out the website right now and feel free to schedule a call with me and let's take your show to the next level. Again, growyourshow.com. You just press record. We handle the rest.